Welcome to this review for BioShock Infinite. And what I'm going to do is, like a lot of my videos, I'm going to try to play the game while I actually do the review. But in this case, it shouldn't be that difficult because I plan on just doing a new game, starting out on 1999 mode. And the first couple of chapters for this, there's really not a lot going on other than walking. So I should actually be able to compose my thoughts fairly well while doing this. But let me go ahead and talk a little bit about this game and my thoughts on it. And well, they're mixed. I have mixed thoughts on this game. Um, Let me just go ahead and start by talking about all the positives. One of the things you'll see as you watch me walk around here and just play the game in the background is how good looking of a game it is, because it does look very good. And I know it came out in 2013, but even still, all these many years later, I think the game still holds up visually for sure. So graphically, it's a very good looking game. The setting itself, it's very unique. Definitely a completely different take than Rapture for sure. Different time period, and I think, like many people have probably said online, a time period that is pretty heavily neglected. Not something that you see in a lot of video games for sure. It definitely had a lot of disturbing aspects to it, in regards to race relations and and other things of that nature. But it was very interesting as far as the time period and whatnot that is based in. Now, obviously, there's a lot of fantastical elements as well, because the whole idea of a city floating in the clouds is actually less believable, if we get right down to it, than, say, a city built underwater. I mean, they're both fairly fantastical ideas, but I think you could see a city being built under the water with a little more plausibility than one built in the clouds. So that's all fine and good, but like I said, it's still a good setting for sure. Now, let me see here. I'm trying to think other positives I can talk about for the game before I start getting to more of my mixed feelings. Um, well, I guess a lot of it just from this point on is pretty much mixed, no matter what I do basically, and part of that is the fact that, unlike a lot of people, for me, I played this game fairly shortly after playing BioShock 1 and BioShock 2. So I didn't have this big, huge gap of time where I hadn't played a BioShock game. And, the other ones were fresh in my mind, basically. And so for me to come to this one, it wasn't so much oh, I played these great games 4, 5, 6 years ago, and now I'm coming back to this one. So I could actually kind of compare them in a little more equal footing, as it were, because I played them so close together. And one of the things I think about it is, well, let's just start with the gunplay aspects. One of the things I feel like it took a very big back seat on is the amount of guns you're allowed to carry. Basically, you can only have two guns at a time, and I know a lot of people are during this time period you had that whole idea of limited inventory space of what you can carry, and for realism's sakes. But we're playing a BioShock game. You're in a city in the clouds. Realism kind of went out the door when you had that, as well as being able to shoot lightning bolts and fire and summon crows and all this other stuff. So I'm not really a big fan of the fact that you can only have two weapons at any one time. And the thing is, I'm probably not alone in this regards either, because the developers probably felt the same way, because in the DLC, um, Burial at Sea, they kind of reneged on that a little bit. You had only two um, weapons at a time, but you had the other ones in your inventory and you could access them at any time. So, so even I think in my mind, the developers realized it's like, okay, maybe limiting them to two weapons at a time is probably not the greatest idea. And furthermore, um, it just added a level of frustration, especially when it came to the harder difficulty levels and dealing with lack of ammunition. And so it was a level of frustration, I think, that probably didn't need to be there, because you would have still had ammo issues anyway if you had, five or six weapons at a time that you could use. But I digress. I don't want to belabor that point too much, because that it was a bit of a letdown for me, especially coming from the first two BioShock games. And then the vigors compared to the plasmids in the first two BioShock games. I'm not going to say they were bad in this one, because they were actually pretty decent. They had some pretty interesting vigors, but I feel like for sure BioShock 2 did a much better job with the plasmids in BioShock 2, because basically in BioShock 2 they took all the same plasmids from BioShock 1 and completely and totally beefed them up, upgraded them. So it was like a complete upgrade all the way across the board. And that is an aspect of the vigors in this, that each of the vigors has upgrades you can do. And it does give you a little bit of customization, so that for your play style, you can choose whichever vigor and or guns upgrades fit your play style better. So I do like that aspect for sure. Um, but I just feel like overall, the vigors in this game weren't as good as the ones in the previous two BioShock games. I'm not going to say they were bad, because most of them were actually pretty decent for the most part, um, but they just didn't feel as good as the ones in the previous two BioShock games. Um, I will make a point, just like I did for BioShock 2. After I got past my initial issues, and my initial issues were basically the opening movies would play, and then the game itself would just lag, and not, or not lag, I guess. It would just get stuck. It wouldn't do anything, and so that was the only real problem I had, was the fact that those opening movies would just kind of stop the game, and the game wouldn't do anything anymore. After I fixed that issue, and then I also fixed the UI so that the text was a little bit bigger, so we could read better on a HD display. After those two things are fixed, the game was super stable. And just like BioShock 2, I definitely have to give it credit for that, because BioShock 1, for as good a game as it was not a stable game. I had lots of crashes and lots of issues with BioShock 1, and I can't say that I ever had anything like that happen at all with BioShock Infinite after, fixing that initial problem I had. And this is running it natively on Linux. So another great aspect of this game I could definitely say is that it does have a native Linux client. Um, and so I guess I have kind of backtracked to the positives at this point. But it does have a native Linux client. But I mean, that's a good thing. But at the same time, nowadays with the way Proton works on Linux, it's not as big of a benefit as it should be, because Proton has definitely made gaming on Linux so much better. And in fact, I feel that even though the original two BioShock games were running via Proton, that they performed better. Because there were definitely times in this where I felt the performance definitely stuttered and slowed down, and it was fairly noticeable. I mean, it wasn't to the point where I felt the game was unenjoyable due to the slowdowns, or it impacted the game that much, but it was something I never noticed before. in either of the previous two BioShock games, even though they were running a compatibility layer to get them going. So that's one thing I'll say. Yes, it is nice that there was a native Linux client. And when the game came out, was it 9 years ago at this point? Um, 9 years ago at this point, the game came out. Then basically, that was probably a really big thing for people running Linux. So it's like, hey, we got this game that runs natively. But that's not as big a benefit in present day. Now, as far as, let's see, so I've talked about the weapons, I've talked about the plasmids, and how they feel like a little bit of a step back. I'm not going to say it's all bad, but when you compare it to BioShock 2, for sure, it is a step backwards. Um, well, I guess the only other thing to really talk about is the story, and I've got to just go ahead and say right now, when you're dealing with these BioShock games, the story is truly a major part of the game. And the story in BioShock Infinite was actually very interesting, very compelling throughout the entire first half. And so, yeah, the entire first half is a very interesting story. And, Elizabeth is actually a really nice companion, and, it's cool having her around. I think she's a great character and everything. And Booker actually is a pretty decent character in this game too. So they give you a little more personality in the game. But the thing is, after about halfway through the game, maybe a little over halfway through the game, things just go off the rails. They really just do go off the rails. And the fact of the matter is, they try to implement these ideas in the game that just don't work. Now, if you were trying to do the whole multiverse thing, they may have been able to make that work if they had just focused on, okay, we're going to have a little bit of a multiverse aspect to this and leave it at that. But then they try to combine that with time travel as well, and combining those two ideas together doesn't work. It doesn't work because, like, at the end of the game, you have Elizabeth talking about a million worlds, and then they try to do all this time travel as well. It was like, well, why would the time travel stuff have anything to do with all these different multiverse aspects? It just wouldn't. And I think that's a very big weakness of the game, is that it does just go so far off the rails in that it could have been okay with the multiverse aspect only. I don't think time travel is, it's just one of those things. I feel as a person, when I see Hollywood, anybody bring in time travel, it seems like a lazy excuse to, it just seems like lazy writing, in my opinion. The multiverse aspect could have worked a little bit better, but they kind of messed that up too, to be honest with you. And I guess let me go ahead and I'll go ahead and say, if you're like me and you have a backlog that you need to take a chainsaw to, I'm gonna go ahead and talk a little bit about spoilers with the story right now, and I'll go ahead and give you a warning right now that I am going to give spoilers. But basically, the whole idea that this whole multiverse of worlds revolved around a decision that you made back after the Battle of Wounded Knee, and all of a sudden, because of your decision, now there's a million worlds. It doesn't make any sense. And then the fact that, oh, well, we can travel back in time to when your alternate personality, Father Comstock, was born, then we'll get rid of you and all these worlds. I don't buy it. I don't buy it in the least. It makes no sense. It just doesn't. If you had just done the multiverse aspect alone, then maybe it could have made sense. And and that's another thing is personally, I mean, Elizabeth having her pinky cut off, and now all of a sudden she's this omniscient, you know, uber powerful character. That doesn't make any sense. These are just not good ideas. In fact, they even kind of reneged a little bit on them in the Burial at Sea DLC when she said, well, when you go back in time, what happens if we run into ourselves? Well, that's not going to happen because we already went back in time. Well, that's the whole aspect of time travel that I always say is like, or always think is, well, you can't change time because if you went back to change time, you tried to do it and somehow you got stopped. And so I just think that the majority of time when people introduce time travel into anything, it doesn't make anything better. It ruins the story. And for me, it absolutely ruined the story. And the fact that you went through this entire game only to be killed at the end and for nothing. It was literally for nothing because then Elizabeth, she still existed. And then she started going through some of the other multiverses to take care of the Comstocks. So what was the point? What was the point of them killing you at the end of this game? There was none. There was no point. And like I said, the whole Barrelette DLC, that whole aspect that they added, it just confused things even further and just muddied things up even worse. And then every single episode, both those episodes and the end of the main game, you die every single time. And it's just like, that's such a nihilistic view. I mean, maybe you could have made it work once. I mean, I could even see maybe at the end of episode 1 them killing you. It could have worked. Or if you had died in a, I don't know, more heroic fashion at the end of the main game, it would have made a better story. But at the end of the day, I don't know, the story is just so weak to me. And that's probably the biggest draw to a BioShock game is the story. And when your story just falls apart the way this one does, it hurts it. It just hurts it a lot. Um, I do like this aspect of the story, though. As you see me walking around in the city, and it's an actual city. You know, you have people, and it's not a dystopian type society yet, even though it does basically get there towards the ends of the game. But it's nice to be able to go in there and see things before the fall. And even in the Burial at Sea DLC, you know, you see Rapture before the fall. And that was actually pretty nice. So I will give credit for that. That was a nice touch, as it were. But, I mean, it's just a shame because, I mean, just look at the visuals here. I mean, to me, it just looks great. I love the look of it. Stupid messages on the phone, which I don't like. I like the visuals, and it's just a great setting that is completely and totally ruined because I guess the guy who worked on this, he's like, he wanted to come up with something to, you know, just shock the people playing the game. Well, shock for shock's sake isn't necessarily good. And now that I picked up that health kit, that brought up another aspect of the game that I thought was actually done better in the DLC. They went back to the point where you could use med kits on demand, just like you could in the first 2 BioShock games. That was another aspect of this game that they took away, which, you know, I wasn't a big fan of. In fact, it's almost like this game is designed, the whole way it works is designed that you're going to die. Now, they had the ability to use the, what they call the Vita chambers in the first 2 BioShock games, and you could basically be brought back to life. But at the end of the day, there was an achievement for doing it where you never use the Vita chambers. You could turn those Vita chambers off, which I did in both my playthroughs. So it's a completely different way of doing it. Like this game is, you're going to die. It's like that's just the way the game is designed. Is you are going to die, and we're just going to overwhelm you. And however many guys that you have left at the time, well, that's the only ones you got to kill now at this point. I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of that whole losing money every time you died thing. I don't know. It was just another one of those things that just felt to me to be a bit of a step back compared to the original two games. I'm going to get this toolbox. And there's nothing in it. Of course there is. So anyway, I think that pretty much sums up my feelings of the game overall, and that there was just a huge amount of potential, just an amazing setting, and and, and for instance, to be honest with you, a lot of the characters in this, I mean, there were a lot of despicable characters. I'm not going to sit here and say that wasn't the case, because there were definitely a lot of really nasty, nasty characters. But I feel that that's something that this game definitely has over BioShock 2, is the fact that I think the NPCs in the game were actually better than the ones in BioShock 2. It's like none of the characters in BioShock 2, barely any of them except Grace, had any true redeeming qualities. I mean, you could say the same for a lot of characters in this, but I mean, and that once again, another thing that the DLC Burial at Sea ruined is the fact that, okay, they tried, well, ruined, or I don't know, let's see, Daisy Fitzroy. In the main game, you're like, okay, she's just as bad as Comstock. She's just a different side of the same coin, basically. And that's the way it seems in the game. But then you find out in Burial at Sea that the Lutesses convince her to basically stage her whole kidnapping the kid, and then she dies to make Elizabeth the woman. It's almost like the Lutesses are the actual masterminds behind everything, and nothing ever comes of it. Nothing ever comes of them being the masterminds behind everything, and they're never held accountable for everything that they did, because at the end of the day, they're the ones responsible for pretty much everything that goes on in all these games. And for what? It just seemed like for nothing. And that to me is probably why, in my opinion, this is the weakest of the three BioShock games. It just is, in my opinion. I hate to say that, but I mean, I think 2 had the best gameplay from a mechanical standpoint, and this game would probably be, I wouldn't say a close second, but I wouldn't say a distant second either. It's just not as good as BioShock 2 gameplay wise. And I'd even say, to a certain extent, the story is even less compelling, because in BioShock 2, yes, you die at the end of the game, but it's not the same thing. Like, your death at the end of BioShock 2, first of all, you're a big daddy. You're already a person devoid of personality. Booker has a personality this entire game, so it's not like you're almost a robot for all intents and purposes in BioShock 2. And then if you have the good ending, you basically you join up with your daughter, and you're not truly dead, you know. And even the bad ending, you two, join together and you become a vicious, murdering despot, basically. So I don't know. Even in death in BioShock 2, it's better than what you have here in this game. I don't know. It's just a very disappointing game on so many levels for that regards, and that's how I feel about it. And like I said, this game and BioShock 2 are both very stable games, and I love the fact that I never had a single crash at all while playing this game, and that's definitely something you can say for sure is great about this. Um, but at the end of the day, the story itself is it's just so weak. Um, it, I feel that even though they may have been able to make the multiverse work, well, squeaker game. Even though they could have made the multiverse work, that was something that it could have done without. Basically, I mean, you didn't have that in BioShock 1 or 2, and it still worked as a storyline. The whole twist and everything in BioShock 1, it didn't happen at the very end of the game. It happened, about three-quarters of the way through the game, but there's still a lot of game left after you got the big twist. So, I don't know. I'm just very, very disappointed with this game, and just kind of every single ending, it was just left like, really? Every single time you as a player character die. Every single time. And it's just unsatisfying. And I mean, you dying at the end of the game isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was here. It just was just done so poorly, in my opinion, and done strictly for shock value. So if I was to give this game a ranking, I don't know. I think maybe this is a little bit, I don't know if I would say generous or whatnot, but I'm going to say 80%. I'm just going to drop it down to 80% because the story was just so disappointing and just such a letdown to me that it ruined a lot of the game. And then again, like I said, there were just certain aspects from the gameplay because they wanted to be like Call of Duty, so let's limit you to two guns. It just was, I don't know, it didn't make a lot of sense, and it didn't make the game any more fun. It just made it frustrating to be frustrating. So at the end of the day, it could have been a better game. I will say that for the most part, I think it ran fairly well on Linux. I don't know how well it would have run or if it would have worked better under Windows as compared to Linux. But the fact of the matter is, it worked well enough under Linux, and I got a lot of playtime out of it. And I think anybody running this on a Linux-based system, from a gameplay perspective, you're going to have a good time. Depending on where you put the difficulty level and whatnot, and your expectations as far as storylines considered. I just feel that as a BioShock game, it is let down for the fact that the previous two games were just much better than it. And that's really what it is at the end of the day. So anyway, that'll do it for this video. I'm going to get my little possession vigor, and then I'll hit a save profile and turn this game off. But anyway, I do want to thank you very much for watching the video. I know one of my friends he loves the game and everything, but I just can't say that I feel the same way, unfortunately. Um, I do think the one DLC, Clash in the Clouds, is actually, ironically enough, probably the best of the DLCs in the fact that it's not trying to tell a story. It's just like, we're just going to blow things up. And that's actually pretty good. So I don't have to get disappointed story-wise. But I mean, as far as the achievements go, I've still got about another 13 or 14% to go. And I don't know. It's one of those things I might play in spurts here and there, but I'm not going to put as much effort into it as I did on the first two BioShock games. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.